how scapegoat survivors can unmute their right to independence. A narcissistic parent may feel worthless when they can't control their child. They confuse the child's willful actions with not thinking the parent is important enough. Such interpretations convince the parent that the child is doing something to them. The child's not just harmlessly exploring their developing abilities in the world. The child's thumbing their nose at the parent and daring that parent to do something about it, or so it seems to that parent. A narcissistic parent will then teach the child a lesson for such offenses. These lessons typically involve rejection and withdrawal by the parent. They may distort the child's desire to play with their friends as selfish. Or if the child is learning a new skill, such as riding a bike, the parent may refuse to pay any attention. So the child learns that doing what they want results in punishment or emotional abandonment. A child with a strong drive towards independence risks becoming the family scapegoat. Their propensity to want to be free can trigger their narcissistic parent's sense of worthlessness. And when this happens, the parent relocates their own feelings of worthlessness into that child instead. They react in the ways I just described to the child's developmentally appropriate attempts at independence. This convinces both parties that the child is the offender and the parent the victim in these moments. So then the scapegoat child's desire to be their own person becomes dangerous with a narcissistic parent. When the child pursues it, mom or dad seems to become their enemy. So they have to find a way to mute this need. Today's video describes how the scapegoat child confuses healthy separation from their parent with selfishness. And this happens through two processes. First, the child adopts the belief that to pay less than 100% attention to other people means that you do not think they are important at all. Second, the scapegoat child and later survivor may identify with their parent by seeing others' healthy attempts to be independent to mean that they do not care. In both cases, the child or survivor mutes their need to be independent. They are either paying all of their attention to the parent or focused on how much or little others are paying attention to them. But they're never attending to what they want independently from how others are reacting. I'll show how the scapegoat survivor can resume pursuit of their own independence. Well, my name's Jay Reed, and I'm a practicing licensed psychotherapist in California and a scapegoat survivor myself. I've worked to understand what helps scapegoat survivors know that they can now be safe to unmute in their lives. And this has led me to what I call the 3 pillars of recovery. Pillar number 1 is to make sense of the narcissistic abuse, to know that it was not your fault. Pillar number 2 is gaining distance from narcissistic abusers and closeness to safe people. And pillar number 3 is to live in defiance of your narcissistic parents' rules. Taken together, these 3 pillars empower you to know you can now be safe to unmute and live with the volume up on who you really are. And if you'd like a low-cost option to understand and apply the 3 pillars of recovery in your own life, then I suggest checking out my Rise and Reclaim Healing Toolkit for Scapegoat Survivors. In it, you'll receive my book called Growing Up as the Scapegoat Child to Narcissistic Parents, A Guide to Healing. And this book is a comprehensive and in-depth guide to those 3 pillars of recovery. If you're a scapegoat survivor, I think you'll likely find a lot of your own experience in these pages. And most important, you'll see how to apply the 3 pillars so that you can reclaim the quality of life that you deserve. Also in the toolkit, you'll receive a worksheet that asks you to brainstorm ways to apply the pillars on a monthly basis. And you can find the link to the toolkit in the description box below. Why the scapegoat child mutes their right to independence. A narcissistic parent has to be superior to others and more powerful than them in order to avoid their own feelings of worthlessness. They can become superior by devaluing and depriving their scapegoat child. Such treatment implies that the parent is more important and deserving than the child. A narcissistic parent asserts their power over the scapegoat child through domination. They coercively control the child into thinking about what the parent wants first. The child's efforts to pay attention to themselves and their own needs are met by the parent's hostility. A narcissistic parent expects their child to function as an extension of them. Just like we're in control of our fingers, so the parent expects to be in control of their child. We don't wait to see what our finger is going to do. We have a purpose in mind and subtly command our fingers to help us reach it. We assume complete control over this body part. This works in this type of context, but it's very damaging when applied to a separate human being. The child's own developmental blueprint for growing into the person they were meant to become threatens the parent's control over them. This blueprint requires a parent who respects the child's own growth pathway. They're excited to accompany the child as that child grows. The parent in these cases has a wait and see stance towards their child. This affords the child the needed freedom and support to become their independent self. But a narcissistic parent must squash their child's attempts at growth. This interferes with their need to see and treat that child as an extension of themselves. Scapegoat survivors often remember the worst moments of childhood coming when they dared to act in their own self-interest. This would result in the parent's seething, self-righteous rage. The parent would then humiliate the child for this offense. These moments are traumatizing for the child, and such children can save themselves by finding ways to avoid such moments. This means muting their inborn desire to be independent without sacrificing needed connection. The only option is to sacrifice the former to preserve the latter. Well, I want to illustrate this with an anonymized case example. Cynthia had always felt like she had to operate very carefully around her father. He could be extremely charming and even fun at times, but at other times he could grow enraged and become quite scary. It took Cynthia some time to figure out the rhyme and reason for this. One incident when she was 8 years old always stood out to her. She and her 3-year older brother named Craig were playing basketball in their driveway with their father. So long as Cynthia was asking her father questions about the right way to shoot or dribble, her father seemed content. But basketball came pretty naturally to Cynthia. She began to dribble and shoot quite well that afternoon, all on her own. She couldn't have known this, but her performance was secretly roiling her father. He began to experience the creeping sense of insignificance he always had to work so hard to keep away. And in his mind, it was all Cynthia's fault. She, so he thought, was rubbing his face in the fact that she didn't need him to show her how to play anymore. Well, he was going to make her pay. Next, Cynthia made a shot from pretty far away and started to celebrate. She raised her fist and shouted, "Yes!" Her father said, "Okay, kids, that's enough for today. Cynthia, I want you to go pick up loose sticks from the yard. They've been caught in the lawnmower engine and I need them out now." And Cynthia said, "But Dad, we're having so much fun. Can't we just play a little longer?" This set her father off. First, in his mind, she was flaunting how she didn't need him. Now she was challenging his authority. He wasn't going to let this stand. "Listen to me, you little selfish child. I do so much for you and this family. And when I tell you to do something, well, then you better well do it. Do you hear me, young lady?" He barked at her. Cynthia felt like the bottom had dropped out of her stomach. She was terrified at the look of black cruelty she saw in her father's eyes towards her. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she knew he would show no compassion towards her if she were to cry. So she put the basketball away in the garage and went out into the yard. She knew that the only way to get back into her father's graces would be to show him how willing she was to do what he had asked. She stayed picking up sticks in the yard for the next 2 hours. She dared not come into the house until he called her in. This, she thought, would show him that she really did care about him and what he told her. 2 ways the scapegoat child mutes themselves. Well, the scapegoat child mutes their own need to be independent in 2 ways. First, they perceive their parents' reaction to their independence to be a moral rule. They unconsciously reason that mom or dad wouldn't be so angry at them unless they were doing something wrong. Since following their own independent striving makes the parent angry, then this must be wrong. This leaves the child searching for what is right. The child determines that right is whatever behavior prevents their parent from getting angry at them. For a narcissistic parent, this means the child must focus more on that parent than themselves. When the child does this, their parent does not accuse them of being selfish. This is exactly the conclusion Cynthia came to in the example. The muting happens as the child pays all of their attention towards the parent and that parent's reaction to them. Instead of listening to what they want, the child has to care more about what their parent thinks about what they want. This results in the child finding it pointless to get their own needs met. Everything the child does must be a joint psychological endeavor with their parent. So doing something just for themselves leaves the child feeling incomplete. They've learned that it's just too forbidden to act and be independent. So let's go back again to Cynthia's case. Moments like what had happened in the driveway playing basketball could pop up if Cynthia wanted to see her friends too. Other kids in her fourth grade classroom were finding ways to hang out with each other after school and on weekends. Cynthia would hear them talking about these occasions on Mondays and really wanted to take part. She became friends with a classmate named Jenny. They both liked to read Babysitter's Club books. Babysitter's Club, if I'm dating myself, was a pretty popular line of books, particularly for younger girls, at least when I was growing up. Jenny said that Cynthia should come to spend the night that Friday night, and they could talk about which books they liked the best. Cynthia was so excited. That night at the dinner table, she asked her mom and dad if she could spend the night at Jenny's. Her father, though, slammed his fork down and said, "What? Oh no, Cynthia, you are way too young to go off and spend the night outside of this house." Cynthia begged him, "But Dad, kids in my class sleep over at each other's homes all the time." He said, "That may be, Cynthia, but who knows what's going on with those kids' parents? Sure doesn't seem responsible to me to let your kids sleep at someone else's house at this age. It's not going to happen. And if you keep whining about it, you're really going to get it from me." Cynthia's frustration gave way to fear about her father's threat. She felt helpless and powerless. She couldn't have known that her announcement that she wanted to sleep over at Jenny's had made her father feel helpless and powerless. Seeing her find and seek sources of happiness outside of him threatened his sense of control over her, and this left him feeling helpless and powerless. He was punishing her for an offense that she didn't even know she had committed. The second way the child mutes their need for independence is by treating others the way their parent has treated them, otherwise known as the psychological process of identification. This tactic often makes the parent's behavior seem less problematic. I mean, after all, if the child behaves the same way the parent does, then the parent's behavior couldn't be that bad. This tactic also allows the child to meet their need to preserve that parent's standing in the child's mind. The muting happens as the child pays attention to others' attention to them. Instead of paying attention to what the child wants for themselves, they have to constantly check up on whether others are paying enough attention to them. It may seem like they are concerned about their own needs, but this isn't the case. The child has to keep their attention too far outside of themselves to be able to care about what's going on inside of themselves. So the child's own needs get muted through this process also. This can happen overtly where the child states their expectation explicitly to others that they pay attention to the child, or it can happen privately within a scapegoat child or survivor's own mind. They may collect offenses at others' lack of expected attention, yet never express this. But either way, the scapegoat child and survivor is living in a world that is defined by their narcissistic parents' rule. Well, let's go back to Cynthia. When she went to college, she found a boyfriend in her freshman year named Zach. They were infatuated with each other. Cynthia found Zach to be endlessly interesting, and so Cynthia seemed to Zach. She'd never felt so safe nor loved by a man before. After about 3 months, though, cracks began to emerge in Cynthia's experience of Zach. Up until then, it had been understood that they would always eat dinner at Zach's dorm every night. But one day, Zach told her, "Hey, I haven't caught up with my friend Jordan in a long time. I'd like to meet him for dinner tomorrow night." Cynthia knew in her head that this was a very reasonable thing for Zach to do. But emotionally, she felt like he was telling her that she no longer mattered to him. The shame she felt was intense. He no longer seemed like a caring and loving presence to her, but a painful rejecter. She told him, "Yeah, sure, no problem. Have fun." But for the rest of that night, she found herself in her head going over and over how hurtful Zach's request had felt to her. A few days later, Zach told Cynthia, "Hey, another friend, Brian, wants to meet for dinner, and I'd like to catch up with him too, this Sunday night." Cynthia felt like this was an insult to that earlier injury. Now she found herself indignant at what she perceived to be Zach's callous and uncaring treatment of her. She told him, "I don't like this. It feels like you're just taking me for granted. Like you just go off and do whatever it is you want, and I'm supposed to wait around for you." Zach tried to explain that he in no way wanted her to wait around for him, that he hoped she might feel free to tend to all the parts of her life outside of him, too. Cynthia knew that this sounded reasonable, but it felt impossible for her to do at that time. This conflict kept emerging between the two of them, and they eventually broke up by the end of freshman year. The scapegoat survivor's life without independence. In adulthood, scapegoat survivors who have had to forsake their need to be independent can face three main challenges. First, the moral pressure to pay more attention to others than oneself can turn life into a thankless chore. Adults with this internal rule must anxiously keep watch of those around them at all times. They must spring into action at the slightest indication of the other's unmet need. All the while, they're forbidden from asking for or expecting the same from these other people. It's a recipe for feeling depleted. Second, scapegoat survivors have to feel like they are bad people. They may have resented their narcissistic parents' entitled insistence to serve that parent's needs all the time. And as they find themselves adopting a similar stance towards others in their own life, scapegoat survivors can find themselves becoming who they once resented so much. And they may not like this about themselves, but all of this is happening in the privacy of their own mind. And it's impossible for one mind to think about what's happening in ways that might afford an escape from this dynamic. So the only thing to do is to deny this is happening and then have to endure this sense of badness. Third, this arrangement means that new friendships and relationships can feel oppressive and disappointing. When the scapegoat survivor is in the mode of paying more attention to the other person, they may feel oppressed. They don't get to think and act freely. All of their attention and energy must be directed towards the other person's needs. When the scapegoat survivor is in the mode of expecting others to pay attention to them, then they may feel disappointed. They're not able to tune into themselves in order to get what they truly need. Instead, they feel compelled to exact the same level of constant and detailed attention from others that their parent expected from them. When they do get this level of attention back, it's in the service of proving, and this is unconscious, that their parent was right to expect this. So their own needs never get truly known nor satisfied, and they may understand this as disappointment in what others are offering them. It can be impossible to understand what's happening in any other way. Well, let's again go back to Cynthia. Later in her adulthood, she was plagued by an inner demand to keep watch over what others expected from her at all times. She knew this arrangement was not objectively fair, yet whenever she was amongst others and tried to focus on her own experience, she'd be hit with a wave of anxiety. These feelings told her that she was cruelly ignoring these other fragile souls. The only thing that worked to reduce this anxiety was to turn her attention away from herself and towards these other people. No matter what she did or told herself, this anxiety would not listen to reason. In Cynthia's friendships and relationships, she was constantly wary of and also prepared to be overlooked. She would feel this way when the other person did something for themselves that didn't include her. Cynthia knew, again objectively, that they were not out to hurt her, but her feelings told her otherwise. She felt like she was being rejected, and this led to the painful feeling of not mattering to them as much as she wanted to. Cynthia would have the gut-wrenching awareness that her reactions to her friends and partners in these moments felt similar to her father's reactions to her. Yet the only options available to her, it seemed, were to speak up for herself at the hurt she perceived to be inflicted upon her, or stay silent and feel humiliated for not protesting this form of mistreatment. If she did what might leave her with a sense of self-respect, she had to deal with feeling like she was acting like her father. This awareness made Cynthia feel like she was a bad person in her own eyes. How scapegoat survivors unmute their need to be independent. Well, these ways of unmuting your need for independence are powerful and often unconscious. If your relationship to your narcissistic parent required these adaptations, then they tend to stick. Muting your need to be independent was what allowed you to have an identity when you were at risk of not having one at all. Being someone who paid exquisite attention to your parent beat going unrecognized by them. The latter threatened feeling like nobody to no one. A narcissistic parent can't grant legitimacy to a child who insists that they deserve that parent's attention. The importance of muting independence to survive meant that it organized much of the scapegoat child and survivor's experience. Reorganizing our experience requires a lot of new relational experience. This is because our earlier organization told us what was relationally safe, and that is muting, versus dangerous, which was being independent. In order to know that you are now safe to be independent, you need to know that important relationships are no longer threatened when you do so. One way to find this out is through therapy. Here, there's another mind that's focusing helpfully on your mind. This allows you to make more sense of how the giving and getting of attention has become so important in life. You then can understand how this process has interfered with your independence. In order to reclaim your need for independence, you have to notice and eventually surrender the two ways you've had to mute this need. This means experimenting in the therapeutic relationship with paying less than 100% attention to the therapist. Do they react with the same punitiveness as your parent did? And the answer is going to be no. As you accumulate these outcomes, you get to know that your safety no longer depends on you muting yourself in this way. Therapy can also allow you to surrender the practice of expecting 100% attention from others. Recognizing how this way of muting operates in a scapegoat survivor's life can feel difficult. I mean, after all, this is the very behavior that you may have deeply resented from your parent. The discovery of this fallibility may feel particularly shaming. And I think this can be because the scapegoat child was so brutally punished for the slightest imperfection. Being an acceptable person got defined as being flawless or perfect. There was no such thing as unconditional love and support for you as a child. Here is where the trust and support in the therapeutic relationship can offer a needed different experience. As you grow more and more convinced of your acceptability to your therapist, imperfections and all, it can feel far less threatening to address how you may be paying your narcissistic parent's rule forward. Now you have room to see and challenge this rule in your life. Others' acts of independence do not have to mean that you are worthless to them. And in return, you're permitted to think about and act upon what you uniquely want for yourself. Doing so doesn't mean that you think someone else doesn't matter to you. This becomes a new basis for being close to another person, one where neither of you has to give up your individual identities to be connected to each other. Well, let's look at Cynthia one more time to illustrate this process of healing. When Cynthia turned 30, she took stock of her life. She realized that she didn't have anyone whom she felt genuinely close to. Although she did pretty well at her job, she could never give herself credit. Work always seemed to be breathing down her neck. To herself, she was only as good as the last project she had turned in. She was constantly watching others at work to see if they were dissatisfied with her performance in even the slightest measure. These ways of living left Cynthia feeling depleted, anxious, and alone. Many of her friends had sought therapy and would openly talk about it. She decided to do the same. At her first session, Cynthia was surprised to be talking to someone who seemed genuinely and persistently interested in what she had to say. In fact, it made Cynthia a little nervous that it was never her therapist's turn to talk about herself. I'm being selfish by not asking her anything about herself, Cynthia thought. But as time wore on and Cynthia continued to attend her sessions, this worry diminished. Her therapist didn't seem taken from, nor resentful at Cynthia taking up most or all of the space in the sessions. Cynthia found a consistently compassionate response from another person for the first time in her life. She and her therapist could explore how and why Cynthia expected harsh rebuke from others. Cynthia grew to understand that her father's consistent devaluation, deprivation, and domineering of her reflected his psychological problems, not hers. Her therapist introduced the concept of pathological narcissism to her. This helped Cynthia better understand that she didn't cause her therapist's mistreatment of her, she couldn't have controlled his behavior towards her, and she certainly couldn't cure him of this. This is otherwise known as the 3 C's, which is talked about in AA and ACA. And I feature and have a module on in my Empowerment Blueprint course, which you can find on my website if you're interested in. As part of this new understanding, Cynthia could see and move away from people in her life today who had to put her down to feel okay about themselves. In year 3 of Cynthia's treatment, she could take full advantage of her therapist's ability to tolerate Cynthia paying more attention to herself than the therapist. Cynthia's belief that she had to pay 100% attention to others at all times had been significantly disconfirmed. She felt much safer to talk about her own experience in her friendships and relationships too. With confidence in the strength of the relationship with her therapist and support she gained from it, Cynthia was ready to free herself also from expecting 100% attention from others at all times. Her boyfriend of 1 year named Matt told her that he was going to go play poker with his friends that coming Friday night. Cynthia felt the familiar drop in her stomach, an inner voice telling her that she didn't matter to Matt. Instead of telling him as much, she brought this reaction to her therapy session. As she and her therapist explored her reaction, Cynthia found it easier to think about how Matt typically was very good at showing Cynthia how much she mattered to him. Why does it suddenly feel like I'm nothing to him? I know that's not the case, she wondered. From their ongoing work, her therapist knew that Cynthia's reaction to Matt mimicked her father's response to Cynthia. So her therapist said to Cynthia, you know, often the child of a narcissistic parent who has no other adult to make sense of what's going on can end up treating others the same way. Doing so lets you know as a child that you're close to the parent in the way you need. It also helps you as a child see your parent's behavior as less problematic, I mean, after all, if you're doing it too, then what right do you have to object to your parent doing it as well? Cynthia initially felt shame towards herself for treating Matt the way her father had treated her. But the presence of her therapist and this woman's characteristically compassionate view as to why Cynthia had been doing this helped tremendously. Cynthia was able to forgive herself for having operated in this manner. Her empathy for Matt's desires to spend time with his friends was also freed up. She then went and apologized to Matt for the times she had grown resentful towards him when he needed to be independent, and that she genuinely wanted him to go play poker and enjoy himself. This development also freed up Cynthia to explore her own independence within their relationship. She realized that she would often foreclose an opportunity to be happy outside of their relationship. She wouldn't reach out to friends that she used to see frequently before she started dating Matt. She'd been operating under the fear that if she acted independently in the relationship, then Matt would think he didn't matter to her. She was no longer haunted by this fear and began spending more time with her friends. Cynthia and Matt had recalibrated their relationship to afford room for their lives together and apart, where one would complement the other. Well, I hope that that case example kind of illustrated this point and talk about how to reclaim your knowledge that it's safe to unmute your need for independence today, especially for those who survived childhood as a scapegoat to a narcissistic parent. And with that, I'd like to thank you again for your engagement with this channel, and the resources that surround it, and especially with each other in the comments section. It's awesome to read each and every week. And I look forward to posting again next Friday. Take care.